Hello, my name is Yanis, and today we're going to continue our workshops on JavaScript. Today won't be as intense as the last time, and we're going to cover a little bit of a chunk of a topic about fetch and how to interact with web APIs, what they are, and how to use them. Also, we will have a little bit of a recap about variables and also functions so that we just kind of rehash the stuff that we learned last time. So this is the agenda for today. So recap, as I mentioned, then what is APIs and how to use them. And then also I'll show how to actually use one of the APIs that I found myself. It's quite a funny one. It's a common example, but there is also a list of a lot more other APIs that you can use and utilize in your daily, if you want to make your own little project. So about recap. So last time we learned about variables. Today can be either var, let, or const. I suggested heavily that you use const as much as possible and don't use vars at all unless otherwise necessary. And lets are there, but you should try to avoid them. It's a kind of holy word thing that people sometimes say, no, you can use them, but that's what I like. That's what I'll say. But you're free to choose whatever you want to choose yourself. And of course, here is an example. So we have this constant string or str, which has the value of hello world, and then we just print it out. Also, last time we learned about functions. So basically, we would create a function, which is a combination of commands that we want to execute, and when you want to repeatedly do the same stuff over and over again so that you don't have to basically put that code everywhere where you need to execute those steps, you would create a function, then call that function, so you would have to edit it in one place. Today, we're going to learn a little bit about APIs as a whole. So what is an API? It is a application programming interface. Basically, it allows two different programs to communicate to each other without use of a human being, because we humans are really slow and our specific information processing is not fast enough for these beasts of computers that we have these days. So it's much faster when one machine just sends a specific data chunk to a different machine, that machine processes it, and then it is being sent back to the original requester. So overall, you have to understand that there are two different machines, and both of those machines one is the information sender, the other one is who is receiving that information, processing it somehow, and then returning a result. So we just talked about functions, so you can think about one specific interface as a function that other computer provides to you publicly over the internet. Sometimes also these APIs are covered with keys, or you need specific passwords to actually access them, but they are still available on the internet. So how would you use one? Well, in one of the last JavaScript versions, they added a nifty function called fetch. Basically, go and you would tell your dog to fetch a bone or something, or a stick, right? So in this case, JavaScript runs over to that other computer and then fetches the data that you need, that you asked it for. In this case, I wrote a quick example here, which has how to do it. So we basically have to state from where on the internet we want to fetch the data, the type of the fetch. I'll expand a little bit more on this topic in a second. And then we just basically call it like this, and we get the response. So there are a few weird things here, the async, the await, the .json. What is this? I understand that it's all confusing. So a lot more information are in these two links. They're also listed at the end of this presentation. So basically, you can also search for JavaScript API fetch and then read through it. But in essence, what are these? So when one computer requests data from a different computer, there is time delay, right? While even though fast, it still requires time to go through all the wires to that different computer, then process the data on that different computer, and then send the data back. So that might take maybe 5 milliseconds, maybe 20, maybe 30, maybe sometimes it takes minutes. And JavaScript is built in such a way that it doesn't wait until this is completed, and it will continue to do other things. And that's why we're saying this is a asynchronous function. So basically, this function is not required to complete its execution immediately. So we won't wait until this gets finished. Once it will be finished, at that point, we will process the result. But we don't have to stand and wait until this is completed. So if you have multiple different things executing one after another, you won't have to wait until this is finished. And this is the async, that's what it means. And we use this async because we want to use this await here inside of the function. This await basically says we have to wait until this fetch is finished, and only then we can write the resulting value into this response variable. So instead of writing the fetch, which is basically a promise, so this function returns, like, it basically says, once upon a time, I will give you a result, but we have to wait until that result is there. And so that's why we have to write the await here. And this async tells the overall scope wherever we're going to call this get data, it tells that scope or something that, hey, you will have to wait until I complete, basically. And then once the response is being sent back to us, when the response is here, then we call a specific method that is in this, which is being responded to us by fetch. And that method is .json. Basically, it transforms the result into a JSON format. So basically like curly braces, and then we have key value pairs. And it shows us all the data that we want from this fetch. On the method. So there are multiple different methods. Methods are basically how we send data across the internet. And we are telling the API, so this URL, what do we want to do with it? So if we say get, that basically means I want to load whatever is on this piece. So whenever you actually go on the website to any endpoint, so any URL that you type in your browser, what you're actually doing is you're doing a GET request for a HTML code, right? But what you could also do is actually do a GET request for even this URL specifically. So if I click here, my browser opens up, it goes to this URL, and it returns me this basically text. But this is a JSON formatted string, which basically says, hey, here's the data that you wanted. It's not HTML formatted because that's not what it is, but it's still a response. And basically that's what we get. So to continue, basically, this allows us to get data. But of course, we don't want to only get the data. Sometimes we want to send the data. And in that case, the method would be either post or put, or also there are other ones. So in case of post, we actually send and edit the data. We send and create new data. And in case of put, we actually send and either create the data or we modify the existing data. So in that case, we would actually tell what kind of that, what do we want to edit. So you actually can specify different variables and tell, oh, I want to edit a user with this name, or I want to get a user with that name. So there's a lot more options available to us. But in this specific example, I will cover only the method get. If you want to check out more, then of course there's the whole internet to read about it, and maybe we'll cover them in the next sessions as well. We'll see. So currently we are trying to use this API Chuck Norris IO jokes random. So what is this place? On the internet, there is such a website which is called chucknorris.io. And basically this is a public API which allows you to get jokes about Chuck Norris. And that's all about, like, all there is to it. They describe how to use their API. So what you need to do, so you have to do a GET request to this endpoint, and this is what you will get back. So this is the example response. You can also do different categories, so you can actually get some search. You can do other things. So they actually describe all of this. And if you would really like to, you can actually integrate it into Slack. So whenever you do in Slack/Chuck, you will get a joke about Chuck Norris. Now, you can as well do basically this, right? So I already showed this. This is the Chuck Norris joke. We hit this API, and as a result, we got a response back here. So here's the joke itself, right? It's under the value part. But it also has its own ID. It has whenever it was updated last time. So apparently this joke was created on, I guess, 5th of January, I would assume. Don't think it's 1st of May because 1st of May didn't happen yet. And yeah, so this is basically the data that we would get. Now, of course, we want to utilize this in our JavaScript code. And now I would like to actually show it how to do it. So here is a typical setup for HTML code, right? All we need to do, well, we need something to actually trigger this request. So I will add a button, and I'll say, give me a Chuck Norris joke, please. Did I write Chuck Norris correctly? I hope I did. Let's check. No, there are 2 R's. There we go. Now we will want a event. So on click, I will want to call get joke. And I will have to put that joke into somewhere. So I will create a div, which basically will be joke. Well, that's about it in terms of HTML code. Now, to do this function, what I need to do is, well, get joke. It will be a function. It doesn't have any variables. And in this function, what I need to do is set the URL. And the URL is what's written here. So this is the URL. Then I need to create the options. This will be method get. And get has to be in caps. So all the methods always have to be in caps. Of course, I'm typing this from my memory, but we actually could go and take a look at the description. So let's open up this place and do fetch JavaScript. And I think I want to open this thing. So this basically describes how to use fetch. And here you can see URL is the first argument, and then the options is the second one. Options can, now, do you have a full description of the options here on? So here we have options for post requests. So there can be a method, so for example, post, and a body. So in the body, you could actually send the data itself that you want to. You can also have headers, so you can describe your own header types. This is important when you want to send credentials or something else to add to your request, so that the receiving computer then can read through these headers and understand what type of information and are you allowed to actually do this. And then there are other types of information that you can add. So all of these options, of course, are available and described in the API. You can also go to Mozilla Docs and find it there. But in our case, we just need the method get. And to be honest, we can even just remove this, and it by default is always a get request. So now we need to get the data itself. So we want the response, and we want to wait for fetch, then the URL here, and the options here. Now, because I'm using await here, I have to say that this function is asynchronous. And that should cover that. And now I want to say that response.json. And I'll show why the .json is important. Basically, the object that we're going to receive here will be a little bit different from the object after the .json is received. So we're going to see both of those. And then, well, we want to actually set the joke to the proper element. So what I'll do is const element equals document. So we did this last time where we talked about how to get elements from DOM by using this method. And we want this one. So let's put it here. Let's do this. And then we're going to say element inner HTML or inner, well, let's do text better, shall be the data dot value. So why is the that value? So remember when I showed you this request here, we know that this will be the JSON response basically. And the value that we want to get is here. So this is the value that we want to reach. This is the actual thing that we want to show. So behind this value will be basically, this is the key, right? And this is the value, which is value. So this will allow us to set this div's text to be this value. I think that about covers it. Let's see. I saved everything. Everything's here. So now I just need to actually open it up. And to do that, I need to go to desktop. No. Projects. Now, I don't even remember where I put this project to. So, oh, but last time when we did this, I did this. So I can do, what's the name? Do this .html. So there we go. This is what I just created. So just to make sure that it is that, I will add a few more exclamation marks here. Save this, refresh. Yep, it's the same thing. So, and because I want to show you how things work, so here's the network tab in your developer tools. So if you open Chrome or any other modern browser, what you will see is basically, you can click F12 and then this will open. There should be always a network tab, which allows you to see some of the internet requests that happen. And also I added the console here as well so that we can see what's happening. So when I click this button, you notice that this request appeared, and then we get two of these items here, right? So there's the response, there's the promise, so they're both printed out. Okay, so that kind of seems reasonable enough. This is more or less what we wanted, but here we get undefined. So something didn't work out quite as we wanted it to. And that's because, so first element, so on line 11, this is line 11. So here we got a response object, which kind of makes sense. And this response object contains multiple different items here. So there's headers, there's different things, but it doesn't have the dot value. Now here, we actually got a promise, and the promise's value is what we want. So the problem is that we actually have to wait on this thing as well, because this is also a promise. So what you can see here for line 13, which in code is here, line 13, so this data, actually, this response.json returns a promise as well, and we have to wait until this finishes, and only then we can use the value. So now, when I changed it to have a wait in here, and if I refresh the page and click this button, actually we get the data that we wanted. So we have the categories, the created at icon, so everything that's basically we wanted to see. And if I would go here, Chuck Norris API. So basically they described how it should look. And if we go to our code, this is actually how it looks. So categories created, icon, ID, updated ad, URL, and value, and the same thing here. So basically we have what we want. And actually, here's the joke. So Chuck Norris beer hat is a Viking helmet with 2 kegs. Okay. So yeah, that's a joke. Yeah, so this is kind of it in terms of coding. You can notice that there's a lot less here. And we didn't do as much. At the same time, this is a really powerful tool and allows you to do a lot more. So there are a lot of free and public available APIs that you can utilize. I added a link to this public APIs GitHub that basically has a lot of different things. So there are animals, anime, I don't know, finance, food and drink, open data. So there's a lot of them. And then there's described how you can use them in every category. So all of these sections actually have multiple APIs. So if you need, I don't know, a pictures for cats and you want to make a API which would always fetch a different image of a cat, then here's a cat's API that you can utilize and use one of those. And there's a lot of them here available. I don't know. If we go to dogs, this is the dog API. So what they're saying is you should do this. And it would respond with a image and a result. And this is the image itself. So if we would like to use this, we have this get joke. But because it's a function, what we can do is actually we can say, well, let's pass in the URL from the request itself, right? So we don't need the URL here anymore because it will be passed in. What we will do though is now create a new function, which will be basically a function get joke, which we'll call API wrapper. And what we will do is data equals. What I want to do is basically make this more reusable. And as a result, I can do API wrapper and then pass in the URL here. Instead of doing this, I will respond with the result here. Return data. And then this function will know how to set the joke. But because I want to also use the dog API, so I will create a second function, which is get dog picture. And this will basically utilize the same existing data that we already have. So the API wrapper will basically do the labor and go and fetch the data and then respond with it. But the actual setting here will be done by these two different functions. So what we will do is you have to be in a sync function. We have to actually wait until we get the response. Same goes for you. And equals await and API wrapper. And then we're going to provide something here. And then we're going to do some more things later. But before we actually do all of that, we want to check that we didn't break anything. So we want to still use get joke here. So this function will be called first. Then this function will call the API wrapper with the provided URL. And then this will execute, return the data that we want. Once we get the data, we will get the element again and set it as the joke. So let's check actually that it still works. Click. Okay, so far so good. Now we want to add the dog picture instead. So we will add a second button and say, show me a picture of a dog. So this will be a second button. It will call get dog picture. Okay. So we're going to rename this to just body. And we're gonna do this. So we will want to do something with that body here, but we first have to set the URL. So to do that, let's do this, put it here. So that's the breeds image brand, yeah. Then we're gonna get the body, and then we want to actually element append child. And then we want to append a image. So now I need to remind myself how to actually fetch an image. If I go here and search for JavaScript DOM append child image, then helpful Stack Overflow actually will describe us. So this is someone wants to find a problem. And here we want to create a image, and then we want to set the source. Okay, so let's do const. Again, you can see this person here is using var. I'm heavily against that, so I will just do this. Then I'm gonna tell image dot source equals to, well, presumably if we go to our dog API, it should be message. So it should be dog data dot message. And then we want to append this image to the given element. Now, if everything works right, maybe this will work. Let's see. Refresh the page. No, this is the wrong page. This is the actual page. So now we have this button. So Chuck Norris jokes still work. We are requesting a random joke from this URL. Now, if I click get the image of the dog, I get the image of the dog. So here's the URL. This is the image. Now, I think the way I coded it, yeah, it will keep adding images to the existing body. So they will just be added always at the bottom. But if I click here, it will erase because I'm basically saying, hey, set the value to this, right? But here I'm adding a new image at the end, so I'm appending, I'm not replacing. So this is the replace, and this is the append. So this is one of the APIs, but there is a lot of, and this is me first time actually seeing this API, so it's not that complex. Usually they kind of have quite straightforward instructions how to use them. We can try something else. So there are integrations with Google Drive, OneDrive. So these will most likely will require some keys, as you can see here, the authentication. So this will require you to actually have your Google Drive access or Dropbox or any other, like it will require some of the keys, and it will require some reading how to get those. But then you have to go to like Google Drives or Dropbox's description on how to use your API key and how to get it. They usually have quite also good documentation on how to do it. This one doesn't have, so Bitcoin charts. I don't think we want to do mining. Currency exchange, data validation. So yeah, there's basically a lot of different APIs that are available. So you can just find something that you like. It's much more simpler when there is no authentication required. So start with those. If course is required, then that will be a different problem, but I would cover that topic separately, to be honest. It's basically when I was talking about, hey, two different computers have to talk to each other, there's also this mechanism of course or cross-origin remote. I don't remember what it stands for right now, but basically it's a way how to protect so that your computer that stands at home and is processing a lot of data already would not be maliciously used by someone else who will start to send a lot of unneeded requests and just bombard your computer with a lot of useless information, which will make the overall system much worse and not usable for your typical users. In that case, Basically, you can set a protection and say anything that is coming from any other domain than these, just don't answer, like don't talk to them, basically. And yeah, that's why you have to check for also CORS and how to set it up. There's the Age of Empires API if you want to get something from there. So yeah. I think that about covers what I wanted to show you today. So a little bit simpler. You can basically do whatever kinds of APIs you want, anything that you can find. And if sometimes you want to do your own APIs and then call them instead, that's also possible. You can build your own API, provide it on the internet, and then call it from JavaScript like this. Yeah, okay. I think that about covers it. So let's check what's left on the agenda. I think there's a Q&A session. If someone is available, it's your chance to ask questions.